Greetings, Maples family. Welcome to our devotional Monday night, the 1st of February. Tonight I got a special treat for you. We're going to show a video from one of my favorite professors, theologians, thinkers, writers, scholars, the Reverend N.T. Wright, who is Anglican. I got to hear him while I was in seminary at Asbury. He came and taught for a whole year there, lectured. Brilliant man. One of the best thinkers in our tribe of Anglican, Episcopal, Wesleyan roots. Tom is talking here in this Vimeo clip about the breadth and the scope of Scripture. And before we talked about knowing what we believe, defending what we believe, having a ready defense, the teaching component of go make, baptize, and teach, I wanted to touch on tonight, or let somebody much wiser, smarter, and more versed in this than I touch on this issue of wherein does our authority lie, and how do we and should we read and interpret Scripture. So we're going to let Tom come on and speak to that for just a moment.
How do I read the Bible? Do I read it from the left or from the right?
It depends whether you're reading the Old Testament or the New, because in the Old Testament it's Hebrew, so of course you read it from the right to the left, and the New Testament's in Greek, so you read. That probably wasn't what you meant. What did you mean?
How do we read the Bible? Any thoughts? Any recommendations?
1,000 things, frequently and thoroughly is the best answer. The Bible was not primarily written in order to be read in 10-verse chunks. We have cut the Bible down to size. Now, obviously, there are some bits, like the Psalms, and like some passages, like the book of James, is written in very short bursts. But most of it, including Paul's letters, and certainly the Gospels, and certainly great books like Isaiah and so on, are read in order to be experienced the way you experience a symphony. Imagine if you went to a concert and you got the first 10 bars of Beethoven 5, and then the conductor turned around and said, okay, that's all for this week, come back same time next week and we'll have the next 10 bars. You think, well, hey, this is. And if somebody said, oh, but if you listen to the whole thing, you'd never remember it all, you think, well, that's not the point. You don't listen to it in order to remember. You will remember quite a lot of it. You listen to it in order to be swept along in the full flow and sweep and flood of it. And I grieve over the fact that there are many Christians who have never ever read one of the Gospels or even one of the epistles straight through at a sitting. John's Gospel, even slowly, will take you 2 hours. Now, if you're really engrossed in a novel, you'd read that for that long quite easily. Why not just allow the thing to wash over you? Of course, then there's all the time in the world to go back and say, I really now want to do a study on John chapter 13 or whatever it is, and go down into the details of the words. But see the parts in the light of the whole, and that means the whole Bible. And one could talk all evening about, all the different things that happen when you see, say, the whole of Genesis and Exodus as one single narrative, and how that actually works from the beginning to the end. The whole of the Pentateuch, the whole, as I said before, the book of Isaiah, or the way that the Psalms fit together into their whole book, and so on and so on. And my favorite, really, where I started was Romans. That most people read Romans in little bits, and even those who think they know Romans reasonably well, they tend to know bits of Romans 1, 2, and 3, then little bits of 5, 6, 7, and 8, and then they worry about 9 to 11, and there's some interesting stuff at the back. But instead, see Romans as a symphony in 4 movements. Think how the themes work. Until we wrestle with Scripture like that, we're really not honoring it. If this is the book God meant us to have by the Spirit, then it's important that we actually take that seriously instead of just snipping it down to make it digestible, like somebody with a huge banquet in front of them who insists on going to the back room and just making a peanut butter sandwich instead.
Isn't it hard to sell it in market it in bigger chunks, though?
I don't know whether it's harder to sell it or market it. I sometimes think people are excited by the challenge, actually, especially young people. Yeah, if you say to a young person, oh, maybe you'd like to read a few verses of the Bible now and again, it's like sort of ho-hum, oh, well, maybe I might. But if you say, hey, there's this world out there, come on, dive in, get into it, swim around, then maybe they'll take it seriously. Of course, they may need some help, because some of it they won't understand, and they need to know that that's okay. The first time I read one of the longer books of the Bible through, I was 13 or 14 years old, and I sat down one day and read through the book of Revelation. I didn't have a clue what most of it was about, but I had this sense of this powerful, extraordinary thing, this sweep of images, and I remember that day, even though it was nearly 50 years ago, a very vivid experience. The church from quite early on chopped it up in order to read the Bible in the liturgy, and that's absolutely fair enough. You can't, most of us can't actually, when we're doing liturgy and doing worship in church, we can't actually have a service that goes on for 5 or 6 hours. We might like to. The Eastern Orthodox often do that, and some of the African churches, once you've got yourself to church on a Sunday, you want to be there for at least 3 hours because you've probably come a long way and it's exciting. But actually, in some of the early manuscripts, there are little marks indicating that from quite early on, the church did divide Scripture up into lectionary portions for reading in public worship. But the thing then we have to remember is this. If I have a room in my house which has a small window, if I stand back from it, I may only see a little bit of the countryside outside. If I press my nose up against that small window, I can see this whole sweep of countryside around. Now, when we read 10 verses of John or Romans or Isaiah or whatever it is, the temptation is only to think of those 10 verses, but actually we ought to see this as a little window through which we see the whole thing. So in my tradition, in the Anglican Church, we say morning and evening prayer each day. There's an Old Testament reading, a New Testament reading each time. And I've often said to people, what is basically going on in each service is we're actually reading the whole Old Testament, but we're just reading it through the lens of these 15 or 20 verses. And we're reading the whole New Testament. We're thinking the whole New Testament, but we're just reading this particular bit, because the service is an act of praise to God. And when you read Scripture in public, it's not just informing the congregation what's going on, it's declaring the mighty acts of God, which is an act of praise and adoration and thanking God for what he's done. So we read, I say, a little bit of Romans, a little bit of John, whatever it is, but we're actually thinking of that whole sweep of the new covenant. And I find that helps me to reflect on what's actually going on when we're worshipping. So it is dangerous simply to feed people with these tiny little snippets, but if you're going to do it that way for liturgical sake or for your own private reading, if that's what you've got the time for, remember that actually you're reading the whole thing day by day, but you're just focusing on this little bit.
Wow. Tom's really great at explaining these things. Very funny. I love the way he puts things. I never thought, until I had met him, of sitting down and just reading through a gospel or an epistle all in one sitting. Now it is a regular part of what I do. It is called long-form narrative, and it's tied hand in hand with the idea that there is an overarching meta-narrative to all of Scripture. Now, what is an overarching meta-narrative? Well, meta means large. Narrative is story. So there's a large story, and the overarching, meaning like an arch over something that stretches from Genesis to Revelation. There is a story that is being told here, and it is God's story of redemption, of his whole created order. In any good movie making, in any good storytelling, you set up, create the drama, the tension, and then you create the solution. Well, it's set up in Genesis, the fall. And then we have the stages of the drama that end in Jesus. But it's a now but not yetness to Jesus. So reading the overarching meta-narrative of the Old Testament, New Testament is all entwined in Jesus. So maybe one of these days we will sit down here on devotion and we'll do a long-form devotion one night, and I'll sit down and we'll read together a whole book of the Bible. Just read it and let it speak to us on its own terms, and maybe the way it was meant to be read originally. So thanks for tuning in tonight. I hope you enjoyed that with Tom. If you did, drop me a note below, say something about it. If you really enjoyed it, you might drop Tom a note and let him know that you really, really appreciated it. You can find him online. You can look up NT Wright or Tom Wright, and should find an email address pretty rapidly. I don't have it offhand, but we'll try to remember to post that below. Thanks for tuning in tonight. God bless.